Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be covering week 4 material. Week 4, we're covering the way that the media portrays crime. So, some of the things that I want you to think about is the way in which newspaper articles sort of read when it comes to crime. So, if you look at a newspaper headline that is where the article is going to be about a crime, and we don't see the race or the gender of the perpetrator, we know that that person is probably white and a man because those are sort of the default, right? So when a black man robs a liquor store, for example, black has to be inserted because the default setting sort of is the majority group and the privileged group, which is white. Similarly, I guess we wouldn't see that so much for gender, but we might also see the same um, if we're talking about victims of gender-based violence, such as sexual assault. So the default setting for that is woman. So if the headline had something to do about survivors and the survivors were women, then it wouldn't have to say women who survived sexual assault. But if we're talking about the minority in that situation, which would be men are significantly less likely to be victims of sexual assault, although it does happen. About 1 in 16 college men will experience sexual assault or attempted sexual assault, just to throw out some numbers. But if it was men who were survivors, then that would have to be included in the heading because that's not the default setting. We think about sexual assault victims, especially in terms of college students, and we think women. So that's sort of one way. So embedded in media portrayal are gender stereotypes, are racial stereotypes. But then the media also serves to perpetrate these sorts of things. And then I also want to talk about what a quote unquote good victim is supposed to look like. So, again, using the example of sexual assault, because that's my area of expertise, when folks are talking about a victim of sexual assault, she's supposed to look a certain way. First of all, she's supposed to be a she, right? She's supposed to be white. She's supposed to have been attacked violently with a gun or a knife or some sort of threat to her life. She's supposed to scream and kick and fight. She's supposed to be dressed appropriately. So if she has, too short of a skirt on or too revealing of a shirt on, then it must have somehow been her fault, right? And those types of sentiments we call victim blaming. And so, yes, most often we think about victim blaming and what a good victim should look like in terms of gender-based violence, but we also might think about that with other crimes. So we often think that if someone experiences burglary, well, they must have had nice things that would want to be stolen. And so that tells us something about what we're expecting the victim's socioeconomic status to look like. And then we also know that when folks are victimized, if they're white, they're significantly more likely to even get any sort of media coverage in the first place. I had a friend when I was working on my master's thesis, she was in the cohort above me, and she did a content analysis of media coverage for missing children. And what she found is that white girls were significantly more likely to have news coverage than boys, but especially children of color. And so that tells us something about who is sort of given a premium when it comes to finding the perpetrator of a crime. And then, of course, we can't talk about the media without also talking about the ways in which the media prop up the prison industrial complex. So when we think about crime and the crime stories that we see in the media, we as a society want to react and say, oh, that person should go to jail. And similar to what Ashley Rubin talks about in her TED Talk, why is that the first sort of gut reaction we have when we see a crime narrative, when we see a crime story being portrayed in the media? I personally study campus sexual assault and campus gender-based violence, and those are some of the most heinous crimes we can think about, right? Like rape and murder are like the two crimes where most people would say people who perpetrate those types of crimes need to go to jail. And yet, I'm a prison abolitionist, similar to how Angela Davis talks in her video from last week about ending the prison industrial complex. I truly believe that that's something that we should do. And so, how does all of that coexist? I'm not sure I have the greatest answer. I once asked Angela Davis if she had an answer, and she too said she didn't have a great answer. And so, as you're working on this week's quiz and you're working on this week's discussion board post, I encourage you to challenge yourself and think about all of these things. I will tell you, Angela Davis responded by saying, one of the first things we as a society need to do in order to address the prison industrial complex, especially when we're thinking about sexual assault and rape and gender-based violence, is we have to educate men and sort of put a stop to what a lot of folks would call toxic masculinity. And I think that's a great starting point. So that's what I'll leave you with. And I look forward again to reading your discussion board posts and seeing your quiz scores. As always, if you need to email me with any questions, comments, or concerns, please do so. And I'm always available to schedule electronic office hours if you need. Anyway, have a great week, folks.